You already know these 7 names: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, the 7 churches of Revelation, each addressed directly by Christ in chapters 2 and 3. Most readers treat these letters as generic pastoral advice, interchangeable warnings that could apply anywhere. But here is what most people miss. These were 7 real cities, each with its own geography, economy, pagan cults, and vulnerabilities. And Jesus addresses every one of them with imagery drawn directly from the physical world right outside their doors. Look at Laodicea, told they are neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, and Christ will spit them out of his mouth. That is not a random metaphor. Laodicea's actual water supply was piped in lukewarm from miles away, useless for either the hot therapeutic springs of nearby Hierapolis or the cold, refreshing water of Colossae. Look at Pergamum, called the place where Satan's throne is, a city dominated by an enormous altar to Zeus, visible for miles, and the epicenter of emperor worship in the province. Once you understand the geography sitting behind each city, these letters stop reading like generic warnings and start reading like precisely aimed messages the original recipients would have understood instantly. The 7 cities also appear in a specific order, tracing an actual circular postal route through the Roman province of Asia, starting at Ephesus, the major port, then moving north to Smyrna and Pergamum, then curving southeast through Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and finally Laodicea. A messenger carrying this letter would have physically walked this loop, delivering each message in sequence. Ephesus comes first because it was the region's greatest city, a massive port and home to the Temple of Artemis, one of the ancient world's wonders. Jesus commends their doctrinal discernment, but says they have abandoned their first love and warns that unless they repent, he will remove their lampstand from its place. A striking image, since Ephesus's harbor was already slowly silting up in this era, threatening the city's very survival as a port. A city dying from neglect gets a warning about spiritual neglect. Smyrna receives no rebuke at all, only comfort for a church already suffering persecution and poverty. Smyrna had a remarkable history, destroyed centuries earlier and literally rebuilt from its own ruins, celebrated in antiquity as a city that had died and risen again. To a suffering church in that specific city, Christ's promise that the one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death lands with striking local resonance. Pergamum was the official center of the imperial cult in Asia, the first city permitted to build a temple to a living emperor, and it also hosted a massive altar to Zeus on its acropolis, visible from great distances. Calling this city the place where Satan's throne is was not vague. It named the literal skyline dominating the city, thick with temples demanding worship of Rome and its gods. Yet Christ commends this small church for holding fast even where Antipas, one of their own, had been martyred. Thyatira, the smallest and least famous of the 7 cities, was known for its trade guilds, bronze workers, dyers, leather workers, each guild built around feasts honoring patron deities, feasts that included food sacrificed to idols and often sexual immorality. Jesus rebukes the church for tolerating a false prophetess who was leading believers into exactly this compromise, participation in guild life at the cost of purity. In a city built entirely around trade guild identity, this was not abstract. It was an economic and social pressure believers faced every single day. Sardis had once been the wealthy capital of the ancient Lydian kingdom, famous for a seemingly impregnable acropolis. Yet history recorded that Sardis had been captured by surprise not once but twice, because overconfident defenders failed to guard a supposedly unscalable cliff. Jesus tells this church, which had a reputation for being alive but was actually dead, to wake up and be watchful, or he will come like a thief, a direct echo of a city that had literally fallen because it did not stay alert. Philadelphia, like Smyrna, receives no rebuke. It sat in an active earthquake zone, and after a devastating quake decades earlier, many residents had abandoned the rebuilt city center to live in the surrounding countryside, fearing further collapse. Christ tells this fragile, uncertain church that he has set before them an open door that no one can shut, and promises that the one who conquers will become a pillar in the temple of my God, who will never go out of it again. A profound promise of permanent stability to people who had lived through the instability of buildings actually collapsing around them. And finally, Laodicea, wealthy, self-sufficient, proud of needing nothing. The city was so confident in its own resources that after a major earthquake, it refused imperial aid and rebuilt entirely with its own wealth. It was famous for black wool textiles, a renowned medical school producing eye medicine, and its own banking industry. Christ's rebuke draws on every single one of these local details at once. He counsels them to buy from him white garments, since they are known for black wool but stand spiritually naked, to buy eye salve, since they made famous eye medicine yet are spiritually blind, and to seek true gold, since they were wealthy in currency but poor before God. And their lukewarm water, unlike Hierapolis' healing hot springs or Colossae's refreshing cold streams, was proverbially nauseating, exactly like their half-hearted faith. Here is what ties all 7 letters together once you see the geography beneath them. Christ is not distant from the specific details of these congregations' daily lives. He knows Ephesus' harbor, Smyrna's history of resurrection, Pergamum's skyline, Thyatira's trade guilds, Sardis' fallen acropolis, Philadelphia's earthquakes, and Laodicea's lukewarm pipes. He does not speak in vague spiritual platitudes. He speaks directly into the particular pressures, temptations, and fears each community faced because of exactly where they lived. That is what it means for Christ to walk among the lampstands. As he is described doing at the start of Revelation, he is not observing the church from a distance. He is present in the specific texture of each congregation's actual life. And that is the word for you tonight. Wherever you are, whatever particular pressures your own life and location place on your faith, financial anxiety, social pressure to compromise, comfortable self-sufficiency, instability, exhaustion, this is not unfamiliar territory to Christ. He speaks with the same specificity into your circumstances that he spoke into Laodicea's water pipes and Sardis' unguarded cliffs. The 7 churches were never meant to stay in the first century. They are 7 mirrors, and somewhere in this list, most of us will recognize our own reflection. If tonight this old unfamiliar passage opened up in a new way for you, hit subscribe and drop a comment. It helps this study reach the next person still skimming past these 7 letters on their way to the more dramatic chapters. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.